Hello, and welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2018 and episode 16 of the Schmidt List. First off, I have to apologize for my voice because I am just getting over a sickness. On today's show, I'm talking to David Hussman, founder of DevJam, speaker, author, and all-around brilliant individual. We discuss how software development has been under enormous transformation over the past 2 decades, and then where it's headed next. Talking with David was insightful, and I truly enjoyed it. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with David Hussman. So tell me a little bit about your background and what DevJam is and how you got basically into software development and then starting a company around it.
Yeah, I've had a lot of time to reflect on that in the last few years, and I realized I've been a geek longer than I want to admit. Like when I was a little kid, I was writing Civil War games on the teletype with the computer at the University of Minnesota. Then I went off and did this rock and roll thing for a while, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then sort of I came back and I was, just like, I got to get a job. I think I'll do this computing thing. Mm-hmm. And one of my teachers always used to tease me. She said, you thought you'd get a job writing accounting software. I was pretty sure that wasn't going to happen. So I started out at this really neat place with a kind of the mentor that everybody wants. Yeah. Brilliant person, completely optional. And it was 3 musicians writing digital audio software. And I had no idea how great my job was, right. Including going to conferences and standing there talking to people about our product. Yeah. And it turns out not everybody liked it. That was the most sobering part.
I bet it was.
Zoom forward, I ended up accidentally publishing a paper for like one of the early XP conferences, and I was pretty disillusioned with the whole technology world at that point. But I met all these people that were seekers, Ward Cunningham, Kent Beck.
Sure. Everything
was optional, and everything was on the table. And bang, Zoom, accidental coaching career.
Right.
Most of my career is a series of happy accidents.
Yep, I know how that goes. So do you feel that because you became that coach, it was because you had that great mentor? I find that a lot of people that I talk to that are in leadership positions because they had great mentors and great leaders.
Yeah, I had no idea. He was the right combination, really humble, really brilliant, tons of geek chops. And almost too optional. The joke was if you go over to his desk, be careful if you ask a question because you're going to get 4 solutions. And the hard part was figuring out which one you could grok and which one you might be able to code. Right. But certainly that. And then I think he was an entrepreneur and my father was an entrepreneur. So starting DevJam and the company I started before that were just sort of an obvious thing. Let's just go do it. What could go wrong?
Right. Oh, that's great. And so I've listened to a lot of your YouTube videos. You do a lot of conference speaking. One of the things you talk about is kind of the history of how we got to where we're at in terms of process and how to actually make software. I heard you say that in the 90s, it was very project focused. In the 2000s, very process focused. And now we're entering kind of this product sort of age, or we're deep in it. But what I've found is that people are very, they were more apt to accept those earlier things, but product seems to be really halting people in some way. Why do you think that is? Why are people having a hard time taking a product focus?
Because I think people feel a comfort in saying this is done. A project is done. We are doing Scrum, all those kind of languages in the product space. If you really look at it seriously, you're not done. Any really great product person will say, you're not done until the product is dead. Right. It goes on and on. Even if you stop producing it, you're still sort of supporting it. And I think that ambiguity is scary for people.
Sure. And so if you're coaching a development team to move from process to product, to get away from that done to being like constant discovery, what are some ways that you coach them around that? Is it just removing a lot of the process? Is it changing how they're incentivized? Like how do you start to transform, which is the word of the last few years? How do you start to transform that team into becoming more product focused? What are some of the ways that you could do that?
Yeah, you have a cute little First Ave thing that's in front of us right here. So I think for a lot of it, to me, we're in this space where, a lot of things that used to be quandaries are sort of now table stakes. So if you think if you take all things Agile and say, assume that's table stakes, just like a musician, you got to show up, you got to be able to play your instrument, you got to be in tune. It's a good thing if you know the songs, because the other musicians get kind of pissed if you don't really know how to play or make it through a song. But understanding key signatures and time signatures and tuning, those are like table stakes for being in a band.
Right.
Then if the band can make it through the song and rehearsal, who really cares? You got to walk out on stage and do something that excites people.
Yeah.
I think that I think we need to go into these ecosystems and kind of stop talking about doing Scrum or Kanban. I think it's time for like the Scrum thing just needs to sort of die off. Hopefully, maybe not in a horrible, tragic way, but sort of like objects. Objects are still a concept in programming. It's just people, and many people still don't know how to use them, but it's not the focus.
Yeah.
Whether you're doing some encapsulation in JavaScript or Java, it sort of doesn't matter. You need to be able to wield those things, but that's just the beginning of being able to do interesting things for people.
Sure.
So I think if you kind of, to sum all that up, if all this Agile stuff and all this like DevOps and 21st century engineering becomes table stakes, then I think we need to start challenging people to stop saying, I'm a software engineer, start saying I'm a product developer, just like you and I were talking about the Ramones.
Yep.
And so certainly the guitar player is the guitar player, but he's the guitar player in the Ramones.
Right.
So like I think when we got to help people get bonded around the thing they're producing and the people they're impacting. And so it's going to be it's going to be a tougher change for people.
Yeah, and so the bigger the company, I would guess the harder that is, right? And so I've seen a lot of places approach it differently where they do a mandate and it's very top down, or they're like, no, we're going to create this innovation lab or this team, and they're going to be the pace car, if you will, that everybody's going to learn from, right? I mean, does it just depend on the company? Can you approach it either way? This sort of way to become more agile?
Yeah, there was a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, not The Innovator's Dilemma, Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore.
Oh yeah.
And later, Jeffrey Moore wrote a book called Escape Velocity.
Yes, I love that book.
So I think he did a good job summing up the problem in big companies. Because like XP, from what I know, started at like AT&T, Bell Labs. It was a small group of hackers that just, like every company has it. So it's not so much big company. I think it's a group of people that are bonded around a thing. Where it starts to get clumsy is when you have more than 6 people. Suddenly when there's 60 people, the process doesn't grow by, an order of magnitude. It grows exponentially or factorially, and people start worrying about everything except for the impact. And part of that has to do with the complexity of piecing together all the parts that cross the teams and cross the user experience. And I think that's one of the things we need to start visualizing that stuff more. Because when you can do that at a big company, then you can make a small product company inside a big company.
Right.
Now, the other part of your question that I'm sure you're aware of too is that there's so many of these IT shops.
Yes.
And it's just it's a sad term. I looked it up at one point, like when did we start using the term IT? And it came about the same time we started prepending everything with enterprise, But it was like a weird segmentation because in the 70s there wasn't IT. Right. It was just geeks building things.
Right.
And then we lost sight of that and we started compartmentalizing. So it's really distinct to go into a product company that says we have products and customers. Then you go into a big company that's an IT company and they have the IT and business.
Yes.
That's that. We got to burn that house down respectfully, I think.
If people are really truly, what I find is that they have to really truly want change, not just want faster, cheaper.
Right.
Right. Yep. And so, this whole idea that this phrase that was coined years ago, this digital transformation or IT transformation or whatever transformation you want to call it, I find to be fascinating because it's really just about becoming more customer focused in the end, right? It's about, you've got a ton of data, your customers want access to it. How are you going to get them access to that data? But in the past, I found talking with executives that they're scared of their customers. They don't want to talk to their customers. And I'm constantly fascinated by when either myself or I know somebody like you comes in, they hire you to coach them on how to become more lean, more agile, whatever the buzzword is. And then you approach them and you say, well, ultimately, you're going to have to talk to your customer or you're going to have to open up a bigger dialogue with them.
and they're afraid to, right? How do you coach an executive around these types of transformations?
Yeah.
When I was talking to Jeff Godoff, he said, just hit them with data. Just, hit them with data and say, this is what's happening. This is the real thing that's happening. Do you want to change this behavior or not? And the only way it's going to happen is if you are actually having those conversations. But how have you found success in talking with executives about this sort of idea?
Yeah, and so, even the whole Agile space for years and years, people ask me, how do you get people to change? And I've sort of drawn the conclusion people don't change unless they want to. And you can tell them what to do, and they'll do it until you leave the room, and then they will revert to whatever dysfunctional behavior because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
It's known.
Yeah.
If we take the executive that is data-driven, I think Jeff's got a good point. I think that, to me, a burn-down chart with Scrum is about as interesting as a speedometer, it's like, or an odometer. It's like, okay, we went somewhere at some rate. Was it a good idea, or should we just pull over and hang out and have a picnic? Because that would be a better choice.
Right.
So what I've been trying to do is, like, if you think about what happened, we'll come back to the executives.
Yeah.
But like what happened with continuous integration circa like 2001, people weren't doing it, and integration was a nightmare, and it was this costly thing, and the people outside of the executive space knew it was a nightmare. It built up on the executives, and it was like, what do you mean we have integration problems again? So we started visualizing continuous integration and showing people, here's the build issues, and started broadcasting at one of the gigs I did at Travelocity early on. They had a lava lamp that glowed. This exec came by and he's like, why do we have a lava lamp? And they said, oh, well, when the build breaks, it turns red. But a lava lamp doesn't just turn red. It has to stay. You have to give it the signal for a while.
Oh.
Which I thought was really neat because it gives, yeah. So he said, I want one. And the team was like, oh, we can't give him one. I was like, if you're scared to give that dude one, that's the problem. Like,
right.
Why are you scared? Because you get a little space to fix it. But that was about, the build being broken, which usually meant that the test didn't run. So that's now table stakes.
Yeah.
That data is everywhere. The data I think we need to start looking at is the analytics. You need to have I've been thinking about this idea of instead of test-driven, but sort of like impact-driven, where when we start working on a little chunk of work, a story, feature, or whatever, first thing we do is park out the analytics. This is the impact we think is going to be there. And I think Jeff probably uses the term outcome. Here's the results we're looking for. And then that's what you start measuring, not how fast are we going. Hey, let's assume our car doesn't suck, so we can actually move forward at a constant rate. That's table stakes.
Yeah.
So I think some execs are going to get that more.
Yeah.
Because I think the ones that are thoughtful, the ones that I think are successful are looking for results.
Yeah.
Then there's those other people that I think you talked about that are scared of data. I mean, I brought those people data in the past, and I hit them with data, and they just executed me on the spot, So I think if you meet someone and you want to change their perspective, I think you have to first understand what their perspective is, no matter how dysfunctional it is, because you can't just present data to someone that doesn't understand statistics, if you will, because they're just going to look at it as just a fancy graph.
If I'm working to have my team being more autonomous and empowered and all these things, right? And is it that analytics that's going to help me understand when something's going to be done? As an executive, I have responsibilities. I have a budget. I have told the stake shareholders or other people that we're going to be at a certain spot, and this thing you're working on is a big part of that.
Right.
How can I balance control but also empowerment at the same time with a team like that? And
to further use a car analogy, which I usually run away from, but if you're driving with someone and you can't see the speedometer, and all you see is the sun going down, they're like, don't worry, we're going to get there. I'm sure we're going to get there. And you're like, well, I'm looking at my watch and the sun's going down, so can you give me some information? Now that we have that data, we can better answer how far have we traveled. But we don't look at, is the destination still the right destination, or is the destination moved? That's what's wrong with a lot of roadmap metaphors, is they kind of follow this anonymously. The right path is the shortest distance between two lines, and that's not the right path.
Right.
But I think where the Agile community is stuck, or where this Agile stuff is mostly stuck, is that people are talking about the definition of done, which is just a smaller version of project-based thinking. Did we get it done? It's like, well, who cares if we got it done? Let's assume we're getting it done. Is it meaningful?
Right.
I think what was cool about test-driven is not just writing a bunch of crappy tests, then writing a bunch of crappy code and just having more crappy code. It was you and I sitting together, and you were challenging me to kind of say, Well, can you express the specificity of that design in something that's absolute? That's a test. Now, what if we did the same thing with the word